6:22, 29 degrees. Welcome back to Daybreak. 76 years ago today, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The date, December 7th, 1941.
It would propel the U.S. into World War II and put our state on high alert. In this week's Storytime with Aunt Phil, author Laurel Downey-Bill tells us about the Native Alaskans who immediately stepped up to defend our shores.
From the beaches of Bristol Bay to the far corners of Bethel, Kotzebue, and what was then Barrow.
When the U.S. government came calling, Alaska natives came out in droves to help protect Alaska. And Laurel, how did this defensive strategy come into play?
Well, U.S. Army Major Marvin Marston conceived the idea when he came to St. Lawrence on a morale-boosting trip with a comedian by the name of Joe E. Brown. Marston noticed that all the white men had left the island except for the school teacher, and that the 700 natives living in Gamble and Savunga were quite nervous about a possible invasion by the Japanese. When Marston learned that a crew from a Japanese vessel had indeed come ashore recently and spent several days on the island, he thought perhaps it would be a good idea to try and organize some of our native people to patrol and watch the coastline. Well, his idea didn't get anywhere with his superiors, but he found a staunch supporter in then Territorial Governor Ernest Gruening.
What was it about the plan that he liked so much?
Well, Gruening and Marston knew that our Alaska Native people were very adept hunters and that most of them were excellent shots. So they thought perhaps they could get our native people to patrol western Alaska coastline and be the eyes and ears of the Army. Well, Marston traveled along 5,200 miles of coastline to personally ask the natives if they would join this force. Now, about 6,000 were contacted, and even though there was no money to pay them and equipment was in very short supply, they had 100% enlistment. Now, these became the original Eskimo Scouts.
Being great hunters and a good shot is one thing, but I'm assuming they probably also need some military training on top of it?
Yes, they did receive military reconnaissance training along the Bering Sea and then began patrolling the coastline, keeping a sharp eye out for any intruders in a war that eventually would reach Alaska via the Aleutian Islands.
So this guard lasted 6 years more or less before eventually disappearing?
Yeah, the Territorial Guard was disbanded in 1947 with no fanfare for these brave people who proudly wore World War I uniforms that also had a gold patch with stars of the Big Dipper on it. But then in 2004, the military finally recognized them and gave them official military discharge papers. And those that qualified could also receive a headstone, a U.S. flag, and burial in a national cemetery.
100% of those people asked to volunteer said, I'm in.
Pretty
That's amazing.
No military, just I'll do it. What do I need to do to defend my land?
Yeah.
We're there. Next week in Storytime with Aunt Phil, the history of sled dogs, from the early days of native settlements to the gold rush booms, how dog teams played an integral part in early transportation. That should be a fun one.